So, you made it to Red Memory and you saw this elevator and your brain exploded. Wow, Hollow Knight in Silksong? How is this possible? My favorite game in the game I'm playing with the same name, that's this game that I'm in this. At least that was my reaction. Now, the cool thing about seeing this elevator is that it is not the only instance of seeing something familiar in Silksong. There's some really obvious ones that you almost definitely notice, but there's also some less noticeable ones that might blow your mind. So stick around to see what those are later in the video. But I think that's good enough for the intro, so why don't we get into the big, most obvious stuff. So first, we're just gonna get the entire Red Memory out of the way. Alright, ready? Speedrun. Elevator, Distant Village, Hera, Vespa, White Lady, Wing Mold, White Palace, kind of, The Hive. That actually might be it. But either way, this was like the really big oh my god moment for me in Silksong where everything kind of came together. I mentioned the elevator already at the start, but like that literally had my jaw on the floor when I saw it for the first time. Later on in the Red Memory, I was really hoping we'd see the Pale King at some point, but we ended up only seeing the White Lady, which probably makes more sense. The Everbloom is also here in the Red Memory, which is what the Delicate Flower from Hollow Knight is. We saw in Hollow Knight that it had this crazy ability to ward off the void, but we get to see this special ability even more in Silksong, most notably in the last dive sequence before Lost Lace. So, that's pretty cool, I think. Another super obvious thing is Hornet. Yeah, you heard that right. Did you know Hornet from Hollow Knight Silksong was actually also in Hollow Knight? If you guys didn't see this one, I don't blame you. Like, it took me a lot of digging and research and, you know, stuff of that nature. At least now we know. Okay, anyways, actually, sorry. We also see the Knight and the Shade Lord in Silksong in the Sisters of the Void ending, which is sick. I had pretty much the same reaction to this as when I saw the elevator for the first time, but this time I started jumping around my room and applauding and crying because I love the Knight. The rest of the obvious things really just deal with, like, the Void in general. Obviously, the presence of Void is there in both games, same with the Abyss and whatnot. We also get to see two more enemies from Hollow Knight, the Void Tendrils and the Shadow Creeper. Shadow Creeper is pretty cool because, as you can see, their eyes aren't that bright orange color anymore in Silksong. I wonder why that might be. But anyways, yeah, it's cool to see them again, and the Tendrils are kind of cool in their own way because now there's no way to make them stop attacking us. In Hollow Knight, after we get the Void Heart, they just kind of chill out, but obviously since Hornet is not Void, she can't do anything like that, so they still thrash out at us. Best we can do is just violently rip through them with some weird flower, but hey, I mean, if it works, it works. The Snail Shamans are also something that appear in both games. In Hollow Knight, we first encounter this dude in the Ancestral Mound, then later find some other shamans out and about dead throughout Hallownest. They're pretty key to the story, and we learn a lot about their ties to Soul and Void, but then we get even more information in Silksong. I've mentioned this before in a past video, but their connection to the Void was hinted at many years ago, and we see it like super mega awesomely in the intro to Act 3. So pretty interesting to get a bunch of information about them that really comes together when you look at both games. But okay, I know you guys know all this already, and you just want to get to the good stuff, so let's ramp it up a little bit, shall we? So, now that all the boring stuff is out of the way, why don't we crack down on a few of the decently interesting things before we get into the real heavy hitters. First guy we'll mention is Mr. Mushroom. So I'm pretty sure this guy needs no introduction, he's the GOAT and all that, and it was pretty obvious that he was going to appear in Silksong given his dialogue in Hollow Knight where he just talked about a bunch of Team Cherry's old projects. He does more of the same in Silksong, but he appears really late in the game, so there's definitely a chance some people wouldn't be aware that he's even here. I think it's super sick that they gave him another post-credit cutscene and that it follows pretty much the same formula as the first game. And also, I can't wait to make a follow-up video after the third game releases and we talk about Senor Mushroom once again. But for now, let's pivot to something else. The surface or wastelands are the only area, or like kind of area maybe, besides the Abyss that is in both games. In case you may not know, I made a video about the wastelands and the surface, so if you would like to find out a little more about them in general, feel free to check that out. Also, subscribe right now if you want to, or don't if you don't. You don't have to. Okay, anyway, sorry, but yeah, like I mentioned in the other video, we see the wastes in a few spots in Silksong, and can also see them in Hollow Knight at the edge of the Howling Cliffs. You can tell it's the same area because these dune sprite things on the bottom here are pretty consistent between both games, so it's safe to say that it's probably the same thing. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to like plagiarize myself, so I think we'll leave the rest of the surface talk to past me. The last thing I want to talk about before the massive ultra category is the Steel Society. In Silksong, we find Steel Seer Z and her vassal Sula. The wiki kept just saying vassal in reference to Sula, and like, I did not know what that meant, but I'm pretty sure it's just like sidekick, maybe. I don't know though. Someone with an English degree fact check me, please. But anyways, it's the same sort of dynamic present in Hollow Knight with Steel Soul Jin and Confessor Gigi. Gigi is pretty much the Sula in this case, where she acts as the vassal to Jin, but we never see these two together, unlike Z and Sula. Not that we see them together, but they're in the same mode. It's interesting because both sidekicks, Sula and Gigi, have the ability to manipulate the void in some sense. Sula creates this abomination to try and protect themselves from what's happening in Farloom, and Gigi can summon back our shade to this spot in Dirtmouth if we pay her rancid eggs. I think it'll be cool when we learn more about the Steel Society, hopefully in the future, and maybe learn why they are a cross-kingdom society as opposed to only setting up shop in either Hallownest or Farloom. But either way, with that, we have hit all the baby steps to get us to the big kahunas, so tighten your seatbelts or something like that. So you've made it to the final part of the video and you're hoping for some super insane awesome sauce coming up. So why don't we begin with the Sprint Master idea? Hollow Knight is where we first get introduced to the Sprint Master in the form of this charm that Sly sells to us in Dirtmouth. Then, 8 years later, we meet this awesome dude who challenges us to a few races in Silksong. Sprint Master Swift is genuinely such a chiller, like probably the funniest guy in the history of the universe, but even with his radiant charm, we don't really know much about him. We can assume there's a whole tribe of Sprint Masters out there, as he mentioned something about a speed teacher, but this could also just be like a 2-bug thing, so I don't know for sure. Maybe the Sprint Master charm in Hollow Knight is the speed teacher, which honestly I could see being the case. But moving away from Mr. Speed, there's a couple more surfacey things I want to touch on real quick. I mentioned the Garpids in my surface video and how these guys are in both the Quirrell comic and Farloom, but technically they aren't really in the first game, so I won't count them here. What I will count is this little sprite up here on the surface, which, if you'll notice, is the exact same one found in the Godseeker memory. A lot of you guys pointed this out on that surface video, and some other very amazing YouTubers have talked about this very specific thing, so it seems like it's a pretty commonly known thing at this point. In his video, Ditlev is Playing says that this means that the Godseeker for sure went to Farloom on her journey to find new gods, but to be completely honest, I think this is just a case of Team Cherry reusing sprites. Wait, don't get mad, please let me explain. So like, yes, these are the exact same thing, so it like most definitely could be the same, but what leads me to think it's not is two things. One, these little bugs here aren't present in Silksong, but this doesn't really mean much because they could have just like eroded away or something geological. And two, the chance of getting that Godseeker memory is really, really rare, so it being something so few people would have a chance to see, I think just led them to say like, meh, if we change a couple rocks, it'll look different enough. And I agree with that, but please don't get mad at me. I just need to sound different enough so I can start arguments in the comments. Okay, sorry, anyways. Another very theorized thing is the idea that Elder Hu from Hollow Knight and Chakra from Silksong are the same species, or come from the same tribe. This I could definitely see being true, especially when looking at Chakra's master. Elder Hu's got the ring thing going and also has these beads around his neck, much like the master, so it's not the most outrageous theory ever. The only issue is that like Elder Hu was a doctor, kind of, while Chakra and her master are most certainly not. Although actually Chakra is more of a warrior than a cartographer, so that might be wrong. Still not a doctor, but at least she and Elder Hu share the combat thing. So not really like true overlap there as much as theoretical overlap, but either way, it felt like that was worth mentioning. Okay, the last thing we've got today is the most interesting to me personally. Zote the Mighty. You know him, you love him. But do you know what his mighty sword is named? That's right, Life Ender. The real question, what is it made out of? That's wrong, it's shellwood. Yes, like that shellwood. I found this really interesting at first, but even more so when I actually like did some digging about this. In the Fangamer Wanderer's Journal, it's revealed that a weapon being made out of shellwood is incapable of doing damage. We know that Zote can't hurt us at all in the Colosseum, so this is definitely true, but even more interesting is when we look at the Silksong area sharing the same name. Shellwood had a reputation, at least before Nihilith faded away, of being incredibly safe and protected as the beautiful, lush paradise beneath the Citadel. This would lead you to believe that trying to make a weapon out of the materials there wouldn't be very smart, especially if deadliness is like your top priority. This is like 400% speculative, however, like it could just be shellwood is, I don't know, some weird word that transcends kingdoms, but when you look at the information we got, I think it makes sense. This would mean that Zote at some point had not only been in Shellwood, but perhaps the rest of Farloom before making his way to Hallownest. We get no indication of this at all, and it's possible that Shellwood is a completely different thing, like I said, that exists outside of the named area in Silksong, but I think this is a really fun idea that would be so cool if it was true. But okay, that's enough, and you have a comment to write about what I missed, so let's get on with the outro. Actually, before you post your comment, there are some littler things that I left out on purpose, like the Weaver stuff and the ancient civilization, just because I figured, like, I don't know, they're too broad and obvious, so it wouldn't even be worth going over. But if you have any fun info about that, feel free to share. I'm pretty stupid, so you'll probably blow my mind. Anywho, thank you so much for watching. I promise we will get to that form soon, and I will see you all in the soon, maybe soon perhaps, in the future, soon in the future.